Hello again. Welcome to part two of the ongoing pandemic reading of Dave Cullen's Columbine. This section will cover chapters 6 through chapter 11, and I'll let you know when the answers come for the accompanying study guide. All right, chapter 6 is called His Future. Dylan's prom group arranged for a limo too. Robin Anderson drove out to pick him up on a Saturday afternoon. They shot pictures with his parents before meeting up with the 5 other couples to head into the city. Robin wore midnight blue satin with cap sleeves and matching opera-length gloves. She'd curled her hair in a long blonde ringlets swept forward to bounce across her low-cut square neckline, a suburban variation on the classic pre-Raphaelite style. Dylan was giddy and beaming, getting ready, all cleaned up for once, working to make everything look just right. He tugged his shirt cuffs down, straightened his tuxedo jacket. He'd gone with the traditional black tuxedo, bow tie slightly askew. A small splash of color lightened up his lapel, a pink-tipped rosebud with a tiny ribbon the color of Robin's dress. His hair was slicked back into a short ponytail that kept giving him grief. He had shaved. His dad followed him around with a camcorder, capturing every move. Dylan looked at him through the lens. Dad, we're going to laugh about this in 20 years. They rode downtown in a big honking stretch limo with tinted windows and a mirrored ceiling. Whoa! Dylan held Robin's hand and complimented her on her dress. The first stop was dinner at Billa Ristorante, a trendy spot in lower downtown. It was a fun time, jokes and horseplay with table knives and matches, pretending to light themselves on fire. Dylan devoured an oversized salad, a big seafood entree, and dessert. He gushed about the upcoming reunion for kids from the gifted program in elementary school. It would be fun hooking up again with the childhood smarties. Dylan had volunteered to use his blackjack connection to get some pizzas. They finished dinner early. Dylan stepped out for a cigarette. He asked his buddy Nate Dykeman to join him. It was cold out, but nice anyway. A little quiet time away from all the commotion. Great food, great company, first time in a limo for both of them. Everything is going perfect as planned, Nate said later. And there is your answer to number 1, which is a 2-part question on chapter 6. Nate was even taller than Dylan, 6'4", and considerably more attractive. He had classic features and dark, heavy eyebrows that accentuated his piercing eyes. They talked more about reunions. Everyone was scattering for college. They talked about Dylan heading down to Arizona and Nate across the country to Florida. Nate wanted to work for Microsoft. What would they accomplish before reunion time rolled around? They tossed around the possibilities. No hints whatsoever that anything could possibly be wrong, Nate recalled later. We were just having a great time. It's our senior prom. We're enjoying it like we should. The short ride to the design center was a blast. Hard rock jamming from the speakers, an adrenaline rush while they riffed on one another. They made fun of pedestrians, flipped them off at random. Nobody could see in, but they could see out. What a riot. Dylan was in a great mood. We've got to stay in touch, he insisted. This group was too fun to let go. Eric pressed his luck. He was crazy for a prom night date, but he waited till early evening to call Susan. He was confident. Girls liked him. He asked her to come over for a movie. She swung by around 7. His parents had just left out to dinner to celebrate their anniversary. Eric wanted to show Susan Event Horizon, a low-budget gore fest about a spaceship transported back from hell. It was his all-time favorite. They watched it straight through, then sat around his basement bedroom talking. Eric's parents came home and went down to meet her. It was lots of aimless chit-chat like Eric's dad telling her he got his hair cut at Great Clips. They seemed friendly, Susan thought. They all got along well. After Eric's parents left, he played her some of his favorite tunes. It was mostly banging and screaming to her ear, but then he would mix in some new age stuff like Enya. He put his arm around her once, but didn't go for a kiss. He did lots of thoughtful things like offering to warm up her car when she had to get home. She stayed until 11, half an hour after she should have. Eric kissed her on the cheek and said goodnight. Prom was the standard affair. They crowned. That was number 2 on chapter 6. I just finished right there. Prom was the standard affair. They crowned a queen. They crowned a king. Mr. D breathed a sigh of relief they'd come through it alive. Dylan and Robin had fun, but joy wasn't really the objective. Prom was more about acting out some weird facsimile of adulthood. You dress up like a tacky wedding party, hold hands, and behave like a couple, even if you've never dated, and observe the etiquette of Gilded Age debutantes thrust into modern celebrity. limos, red carpets, and a constant stream of paparazzi played by parents, teachers, and hired photo hacks. For enjoyment, someone invented after prom. Peel off the cummerbund, step out of the 2-inch pumps, forget the stupid posing, and indulge in actual fun, like gambling. The Columbine gym was outfitted with row after row of blackjack, poker, and craps tables. Parents in Vegas costumes served as dealers. They had ball toss contests, a jump castle, and a bungee cord plunge. It stayed active till dawn. After prom had its own theme, New York, New York. Some parents had built a life-size maze you had to follow to get into the school, and the entranceway was festooned with cardboard mock-ups of the Empire State Building and the Statue of Liberty. Some of the boys barely saw their dates at after prom. Some didn't have one. Eric joined Dylan in his limo group. They spent hours in the casino losing fake money. Patrick Ireland hung out nearby. They never met. Dylan kept talking about college, about his future. He kept saying he could hardly wait. Next is Chapter 7, Church on Fire. Before I read Chapter 7, it's about evangelicals. We have to understand as an evangelical is usually it's a Christian who is not content just being a Christian. Evangelicals believe it's part of their mission to convert other people, to spread the word of Jesus and make sure everyone gets it and accepts Jesus Christ as their Savior. So that's what an evangelical is, okay? They're like promoting Christianity aggressively. This is a church on fire. This is the heart of evangelical country. This is a Trinity Christian Center, an ecstatic congregation crying out for Jesus in a converted Kmart half a mile from Columbine. As the casino shut down in the school gym, the faithful rose across the Front Range. They spilled out into the aisles of Trinity Christian, heaving and rumbling like an old-time tent revival. The frenzied throng thrust 200 arms towards the heavens, belting out the spirit their souls just couldn't contain. The choir drove them higher. It ripped through the chorus of Hillsong's burning anthem, and the crowd surged. This is a church on fire. We have a burning desire. No one had the fever like a sunburned high school girl, radiating from the choir like the orchid splashed across her sundress. She threw her head back, squeezed her eyes shut, and kept singing, her lips charging straight through the instrumental jam. Since pioneer days in the Second Great Awakening, Colorado had been a hotbed on the itinerant ministry circuit. By the 1990s, Colorado Springs was christened the Evangelical Vatican. The city of Denver seemed immune to the fervor, but its western suburbs were roiling. Nowhere did the Spirit move more strongly than at Trinity Christian Center. They had a Savior to reach out to and the enemy, the devil, to repel. Satan was at work in Jefferson County. Any Bible church pastor would tell you so. Long before Eric and Dylan struck, tens of thousands of Columbine evangelicals prepared for the dark prince. The enemy, they called him. He was always on the prowl. Columbine sits 3 miles east of the foothills. Closer to the peaks, property values rise steadily in tandem with decorum. In comparison to Trinity Christian, upscale congregations like Foothills Bible Church mount Broadway productions. Foothills pastor Bill Oldemullen took stage like the quintessential televangelist, blow-dried, swept-back helmet hair, crisp tie, and tailored Armani suit in muted earth tones. But the stereotype dissolved when he opened his mouth. He was sincere, sharp-witted, and intellectual. He rebuked ministry for money preachers and their get-saved-quick schemes. West Bowles Community Church lay between other megachurches geographically, socioeconomically, and intellectually. Like Oldemullen, Pastor George Kirsten was a biblical literalist. He was contemptuous of peers obsessed with a loving Savior. His Christ had a vengeful side. Love was an easy sell that missed half the story. That's offensive to me, Kirsten said. He preached a strict black and white moral code. People want to paint the world in a lot of gray, he said. I don't see that in the scripture. Religion did not mean an hour a week on Sundays to this crowd. There was Bible study, youth group, fellowship, and retreats. The thought for the day started the morning. Scripture came before bed. West Bowles kids roamed the halls of Columbine sporting WWJD bracelets. What would Jesus do? And exchanging Christian rock CDs. Occasionally, they witnessed to the unbelievers or argued scripture with the mainline Protestants. The Columbine Bible Study Group met at the school once a week. Its major challenges were resisting temptation, adhering to a higher standard, and acting as worthy servants of Christ. Its members kept a vigilant eye out for the enemy. Pastors Kirsten and Oldemullen spoke of Satan frequently. Reverend Oldemullen called him by name. Kirsten preferred the enemy. Either way, Satan was more than a symbol of evil. He was an actual physical entity, hungry for compliant souls. He snatched the most unlikely targets. Who would have expected Cassie Bernal to fall? She was the angelic blonde junior who dressed up for a function at the Marriott on Saturday instead of prom. She was scheduled to speak at her church's youth group meeting on Tuesday. Cassie's house sat right beside Columbine property, but it was only her second year at the school. She'd transferred in from Christian Fellowship School. She had begged her parents to make the move. The Lord had spoken to Cassie. He wanted her to witness to the unbelievers at Columbine, which is number 3 on chapter 7. You can write that. Monday morning was uneventful. Lots of bleary eyes from Saturday's all-nighter, lots of chatter about who did what. All Mr. D's kids had made it back. A handful peeked through his doorway with big grins. "Just wanted you to see our bright, shining faces," they said. Supervisory Special Agent Dwayne Fuselier was a little on edge Monday. He headed the FBI's domestic terrorism unit in Denver, and April 19th was a dangerous day in the region. The worst disaster in FBI history had erupted 6 years earlier, and retaliation followed exactly 2 years after. On April 19th, 1993, the Bureau ended a 51-day standoff with the Branch Davidian cult near Waco, Texas, by storming the compound. A massive fire had erupted, and most of the 80 inhabitants had burned to death, adults and children. Agent Fuselier was one of the nation's foremost hostage negotiators. He spent 6 weeks trying to talk the Davidians out. Fuselier had opposed the attack on the compound, but lost. Just before storming in, the FBI gave Fuselier one final chance. He was the last person to speak to Davidian leader David Koresh. He watched the compound burn. Speculation raged about the FBI's role in the blaze. The controversy nearly ended Attorney General Janet Reno's career. Waco, W-A-C-O, Waco, radicalized the anti-government militia movement, made April 19th into a symbol of perverse authority. Timothy McVeigh sought vengeance by bombing the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City on April 19th, 1995. His explosion killed 168 people, the largest terrorist attack in American history to that point. So in that last section, we're at number 4 on chapter 7, the 2 disasters. Next is chapter 8, maximum human density. It's a safe bet that Eric and Dylan watched the carnage of Waco and Oklahoma City on television with the rest of the country. Those atrocities were particularly prominent in this region. McVeigh was tried in federal court in downtown Denver and sentenced to death while the boys attended Columbine in the suburbs. The scenes of devastation were played over and over. In his journal, Eric would brag about topping McVeigh. Oklahoma City was a one-note performance. McVeigh set his timer and walked away. He didn't even see his spectacle unfold. Eric dreamed much bigger than that. Judgment Day, they called it. Columbine would erupt with an explosion too. Eric designed at least 7 big bombs working off the anarchist cookbook he found on the web. He chose the barbecue design, standard propane tanks, the fat, round, white ones, 18 inches tall, a foot in diameter, packing some 20 pounds of highly explosive gas. Bomb number 1 employed aerosol cans for detonators, each wired up to an old-fashioned alarm clock with round metal bells on top. Step 1 was planting them in a park near Eric's house, 3 miles from the school. That bomb could kill hundreds of people, but was intended for only stones and trees. The attack was to begin with a decoy, rock the neighborhood, and divert police. Every free minute raised the potential body count. The boys were going to double or triple McVeigh's record. They estimated the damage variously at hundreds, several hundred, and at least 400. Oddly conservative for the arsenal they were preparing. Eric may have had another reason for the decoy plan. He was uncannily perceptive about people, and Dylan had been wavering. If Dylan was reticent, the decoy would help ease him in. It was a harmless explosive. No one would be hurt by it, but once they drove off, Dylan would be committed. The main event was scripted in 3 acts, just like a movie. It would kick off with a massive explosion in the Commons. More than 600 students swarmed in at the start of a lunch. And 2 minutes after the bell rang, most of them would be dead. Act 1 featured 2 bombs using propane tanks like the decoy. Each was strung with nails and BBs for shrapnel, lashed to a full gasoline can and a smaller propane tank, and wired to similar bell clocks. Each bomb fit snugly into a duffel bag, which Eric and Dylan would lug in at the height of passing period chaos. Again, Dylan was eased into killing. Clicking over the alarm hinge was bloodless and impersonal. It didn't feel like killing. No blood, no screams. Most of Dylan's murders would be over before he faced them. The fireball would wipe out most of the lunch crowd and set the school ablaze. Eric drew detailed diagrams. He spaced the bombs out, but located them centrally for maximum killing radius. They would sit beside two thick columns supporting the second floor. Computer modeling and field tests would later demonstrate a high probability that the bombs would have collapsed some of the second floor. Eric apparently hoped to watch the library and its inhabitants crash down upon the flaming lunchers. As the time bombs ticked down, the killers would exit briskly and flare out across the parking lot at a 90-degree angle. Each boy was to head for his own car, strategically parked about 100 yards apart. The cars provided mobile base camps where they would gear up to unleash Act 2. Pre-positioning ensured optimal fire lanes. They had drilled the gear-ups repeatedly and could execute them rapidly. The bombs would detonate at 11:17, and the densely packed wing would crumble. As the flames leapt up, Eric and Dylan would train their semi-automatics on the exits and await survivors. So that whole thing was Act 1, which is number 5 on Chapter 8. Here comes number 6. Act 2, firing time. This was going to be fun. Dylan would sport an Intratec Tech DC-9, a 9mm semi-automatic handgun, and a shotgun. Eric had a high-point 9mm carbine rifle and a shotgun. They'd saw the barrels off the shotguns for concealment. Between them, they'd carry 80 portable explosives, pipe bombs, and carbon dioxide bombs that Eric called crickets, plus a supply of Molotov cocktails and an assortment of freakish knives in case it came down to hand-to-hand combat. They'd suit up in infantry-style web harnesses, allowing them to strap much of the ammo and explosives to their bodies. Each had a backpack and a duffel bag to hump more hardware into the attack zone. They would tape flint match striker strips to their forearms for rapid-fire pipe bomb attacks. Their long black dusters would go on last, for concealment and for looking badass. Later, the dusters were widely referred to as trench coats. They planned to advance on the building as soon as the bombs blew. They'd be set back far enough to see each other around the corner and just barely avoid the blast. They had devised their own hand signals to communicate. Every detail was planned. Battle positions were imperative. The 250,000 square foot school had 25 exits, so some survivors would escape. The boys could remain in visual contact and still cover two sides of the building, including 2 of the 3 main exits. Their firing lines intersected on the most important point, the student entrance adjacent to the commons and just a dozen yards from the big bombs. Positioning yourself at a right angle to the objective is standard U.S. infantry practice taught to every American foot soldier at the infantry school in Fort Benning, Georgia. Interlocking fire lanes, the military calls it. The target is constantly under fire from 2 sides, yet the assault team's weapons are never pointed at Confederates, like at their own guys. Even if a shooter turns sharply to peg an escaping enemy, his squad mates are safe. From their initial positions, Eric and Dylan could sweep their gun barrels across a 90-degree firing radius without endangering each other. Even if one shooter advanced more quickly, he would never violate his partner's fire lane. It is both the safest and most effective assault pattern of modern small arms warfare. So there is number 6, is about Act 2 on Chapter 8. This was the phase Eric and Dylan were savoring. It was also when they expected to die. They had little hope of witnessing Act 3. 45 minutes after the initial blast, when the cops declared it was over, paramedics started loading amputees into ambulances, and reporters broadcast the horror to a riveted nation. Eric's Honda and Dylan's BMW would rip right through the camera crews and the first responders. Each car was to be loaded with 2 more propane devices and 20 gallons of gasoline in an assortment of orange plastic jugs. Their positions had been chosen to maximize both the firepower in Act 2 and the carnage in Act 3. The cars would be close to the building, near the main exits, ideal locations for police command, emergency medical staging, and news vans. They would be just far enough from the building and each other to wipe out most of the junior and senior parking lots. Maximum body count, nearly 2,000 students, plus 150 faculty and staff, plus who knows how many police, paramedics, and journalists. There is number 7 about Act 3 on Chapter 8. Eric and Dylan had been considering a killing spree for at least a year and a half. They had settled on the approximate time and location a year out, April, in the Commons. They finalized details as Judgment Day approached, Monday, April 19th. The date appeared firm. The boys referred to it twice matter-of-factly in the recordings they made in the last 10 days. They did not explain the choice, though Eric discussed topping Oklahoma City, so they may have been planning to echo that anniversary as Tim McVeigh had done with Waco. So there is number 8 on Chapter 8. First part of number 8 on Chapter 8. The moment of the attack was critical. Students like to eat early, so A lunch was the most popular. The maximum human density anywhere, anytime in the high school occurred in the Commons at 11:17. Eric knew the exact minute because he had inventoried his targets. He'd counted just 60 to 80 kids scattered throughout the Commons from 10:30 to 10:50. Between 10:56 and 10:58, lunch ladies bring out shit, he wrote. Then lunch door 2 opened and a, quote, steady trickle of people appeared. He recorded the exact moment each door opened and body counts in minute-by-minute increments. At 11:10, the bell rang, fourth period ended, students piled into the hallways. Moments later, they rushed the lunch lines, 50 more every minute, 300, 350, 400, 450, 500 plus by 11:15. Eric and Dylan's various handwriting timelines show the bombs scheduled to explode between 11:16 and 11:18. The final times are followed by little quips, have fun, and ha ha ha. Eric and Dylan expected their attack to puzzle the public, so they left an extraordinary cachet of material to explain themselves. They kept schedules, budgets, maps, drawings, and all sorts of logistical artifacts, along with commentary in notebooks, journals, and websites. A series of videos were specifically designed to explain their attack. They would come to be known as the basement tapes, because the bulk were shot in Eric's basement. Even more illuminating was Eric's 20-page journal devoted to his thinking. Both chronicles are revealing, but also maddeningly contradictory. They were so disturbing that the sheriff's department would choose to hide them from the public, concealing even the existence of the basement tapes for months. Eric and Dylan's true intentions would remain a mystery for years. The date was the first element of Eric's plan to fail, apparently because of ammo. On Monday, he had nearly 700 rounds for the 4 guns. He wanted more. He had just turned 18, so he could buy his own, but that fact somehow escaped him. He was used to relying on others, and he thought Mark Maines could help. Maines was a drug dealer who ran some guns and ammo on the side. He had come through with the Tech 9 in January, but he was dragging ass on the ammo. Thursday night, Eric began hounding him to come up with the stuff. 4 days later, Eric remained empty-handed. They could have gone ahead without the extra ammo, but their firepower would have been impaired. Shotguns are not built for rapid-fire assault. The Tech 9 took 20 and 30-round magazines. Dylan could release one with the flick of a button and pop in a new mag with a simple sweep of the hand. Real gun aficionados hate the thing. It's too big and bulky for a professional and way too unreliable. A poor man's Uzi. Dealers complain of slapdash design, frequent misfeeds, and a lousy sighting mechanism that is often misaligned and can't be adjusted. Cheap construction and marginal reliability, says a major gun dealer's website. But it was available. So there's the second part of number 8 about why they didn't execute it on that day. They didn't have enough ammo. Eric and Dylan had a mostly uneventful Monday. That would be the 19th. They got up before sunrise and made bowling class by 6 a.m. They cut 4th hour for an extended lunch at Blackjack and attended their other classes as usual. That evening, Maine suddenly came through with the ammo. He'd gotten it at Kmart, 2 boxes with 50 rounds apiece. Together, they cost $25. Eric drove to Maine's house to pick up the ammo. He seemed eager to get it. Maines asked if he was going shooting that night. Maybe tomorrow, Eric said. Moving on to Chapter 9. Dads. Dave Sanders had never talked about regret before, not to Frank DeAngelis. They talked every day. They had been close for 20 years, but they had never gone there. It came up unexpectedly on Monday afternoon. Frank strolled out to the baseball diamond to watch his boys take on arch rival Chatfield. He had coached the team before he went into administration alongside his old friend Dave Sanders. And there at the top of the bleachers was Dave watching right now. He had a couple hours to kill until his girls arrived for basketball practice. The season was over, but they were working fundamentals for next year. Dave could have spent the time grading papers, but it was hard to fight the lure of the field. Mr. D said hi to the kids, excited to see him there, then sat down next to Dave. They talked for 2 hours. They talked about everything, their entire lives, coaching, of course. The first time they met, when Frank arrived at Columbine in 1979, he was one of the shortest teachers on the faculty, and the principal recruited him to coach basketball. They needed a freshman coach, and I was on a 1-year contract, Frank said. The principal said, Frank, if you do me this one favor, I owe you one. But what am I going to say? I'll do whatever you want, sir. So I coach basketball. Conversation was lighthearted for a long time, Dave cutting up as usual. Then he turned serious. Do you miss coaching? He asked. Not really. Frank's answer sort of surprised Dave. Coaching was his life, Frank explained, but he had never really left it. He just expanded his audience. You think so? Dave wondered. Oh, yeah, Frank said. You can't really teach a kid anything. You can only show him the way and motivate him to learn it himself. Same thing applies to shortstops turning the double play and students grasping the separation of powers in the U.S. government. It's all the same job. Now he had to coach teachers, too, to inspire their own kids to learn. What about you? Frank asked. Any regrets? Yeah, too much coaching. They shared a good laugh. Seriously, though, Dave said, his family had come second to coaching. God, his family came second. And there's your answer to number 9 on chapter 9. Frank suppressed another laugh. His own son, Brian, was 19. Frank was confident he had been a good dad, but never enough of one. It had rankled his wife since day one, and recently she had laid into him about it. When are you going to stop raising everybody else's kids and start raising your own? That stung. It was a little hard to share, but this seemed like the moment, and Dave seemed like the guy. Dave understood it was bittersweet for both of them. They had reached middle age blissfully. They wouldn't change a moment for their own sake, but had they shortchanged their kids? Frank's son was grown now, and Dave's daughters were too. Too late. But they were still young women, and Dave had 5 grandkids and was hoping for more. Dave had not told the other coaches he was cutting back yet. He had not announced his decision to take off the first summer in memory. He confided it all to Frank now. What an amazing guy, Frank thought. He thought about hugging Dave. He did not. The game was still going, but Dave got up. My girls are waiting for me, he said. I have open gym. Frank watched him walk slowly away. Coach Sanders had said something else on his mind. There's a garbage truck outside, so I'm going to close it up. Read a little louder. He had held his first team meeting last Friday, and now his new team captain, Liz Carlston, had failed to show. He had expected to see her tonight. It was going to be a tense conversation, and it wasn't going to be just her. Sanders sat all the girls down on the court. They talked a lot about dedication. How was it going to look to the freshmen if the team leaders mouthed the words, then failed to show up? He expected a 100% commitment. Every practice, every meeting, or you're out. He told them to scrimmage. He let them keep at the entire evening. He sat in a folding chair, watching, analyzing, preparing. At the end of the night, Liz tried to summon the courage to talk to him. She had just blanked on the meeting. She hadn't meant anything by it. She felt guilt and fear and anger. He wouldn't actually cut her, would he? Why hadn't he given her a chance to explain? She stopped at the baseline to change her shoes. Coach Sanders was right there. She should talk to him. She walked out quietly. She didn't even say goodbye. Linda Lou was asleep when Dave got home that night. He kissed her softly. She woke up and smiled. Dave was holding a wad of cash, a thick stash, 70 singles. He flung them toward her, and they fluttered down onto the comforter. She got excited. She loved his little surprises, but she wasn't sure what this was about. He went on with it for a minute, got her hopes up, and then said he was silly. She was silly. It was for her mom. Linda's mom was turning 70 on April 20th. She liked to gamble. She would like that. Dave was all laughs that night with Linda. She was shocked when he learned later how tense his evening had been. That's how the man could change, she said. Walked through our door, and he was done with basketball. Now he was thinking of my mom. He went down to fix himself a Diet Coke and rum. He found a game. Linda fell back asleep with a smile. Morning was less pleasant. The alarm buzzed at 6:30. Linda and Dave were both in a rush. Linda had to pick up balloons for her mom's birthday party, and Dave had to drop Linda's poodle off for a haircut. Dave had no time for breakfast. He snagged an energy bar and a banana for the car. It was trash day, his job, but he was going to be late. He asked Linda if she would do it. She was too stressed. I really don't have time today. I'm really going to be late, he muttered. They rushed out to separate cars and realized they had forgotten to kiss goodbye. They always kissed goodbye. Dave blew her a kiss from the driveway. Moving on to chapter 10. It's called Judgment. Trash trucks are outside my house. On Tuesday morning, the boys rose early as usual. It was dark but warm already, set to soar into the 80s with blue skies perfect for their fires. It was going to be a beautiful day. Dylan was out of the house by 5:30. His parents were still in bed. He called out, "Bye," and shut the door behind himself. They skipped bowling class and went straight to work. Dylan scrawled the schedule into Eric's day planner under the heading, "Make today count." Eric illustrated it with a blazing gun barrel. First, there was the grocery store, where they met up to acquire the last of the propane tanks, 2 for the cafeteria, 2 for each car, and 2 for the decoy. The big bombs were the heart of the attack. Eric had designed them months before, but had left acquisition to the final morning. The boys had stashed most of the arsenal in Eric's bedroom closet, and he had faced a couple of close calls with his parents already. Hiding a cluster of 20-pound tanks in there was out of the question. They returned to Eric's house at 7 o'clock a.m. and then split up. Eric filled the propane tanks. Dylan got the gasoline. They allotted half an hour to assemble the big bombs and set up the cars, and an hour for one last round of gear up, practice, and chill. They got something to eat. Dylan apparently had potato skins. So there is your answer to number 10 on chapter 10, describing Eric and Dylan's morning the day of the attack. Several friends noticed peculiarities. Robin Anderson was surprised to see Dylan a no-show for calculus. He had sounded fine on the phone the previous night. Then a friend told her Eric had been missing from third hour. The boys cut an occasional class together, but never an entire morning. Robin hoped Dylan wasn't sick. She made a mental note to call once she got home. Their friend Brooks Brown had a stranger reaction. Eric had missed a test in psychology class. What kind of stunt was that? Chill time was over. It had gone on too long, perilously over schedule. Shortly before 11 a.m., Eric and Dylan set off with the arsenal. Dylan wore cargo pants, a black t-shirt printed with Wrath, and his Red Sox cap turned backward as usual. His cargo pockets were deep enough to conceal most of the sawed-off shotgun before he pulled on the duster. Eric's t-shirt said, "Natural Selection." They both wore black combat boots and shared a single pair of black gloves, the right on Eric, the left on Dylan. They left 2 pipe bombs behind at Eric's house, 6 at Dylan's. Eric laid a microcassette on the kitchen counter with some final thoughts. They also left the basement tapes with a final goodbye recorded that morning. They drove separate cars to a park near Eric's house, dumped the decoy bomb in a field, and set the timers for 11:14. Combat operations were underway. They hopped back in their cars and headed for the school. They had to hustle now. The last few minutes were critical. They couldn't plant the big bombs until lunch began. Fourth period ended at 11:10. Once the bell rang, they had 7 minutes to carry the bombs in, navigate the turbulent lunch crowd, stash the bombs by the designated pillars, get back to their cars, gear up, take cover, and prepare to attack. Eric pulled into the parking lot at 11:10, several minutes behind schedule. A couple of girls spotted his car as they headed out for lunch. They honked and waved. They liked him. Eric waved back and smiled. Dylan followed him in. No waves. Dylan drove to his normal spot in the senior lot and parked his BMW directly in front of the cafeteria. When the attack began, this would afford him a clear sweep of the southwest side of the building, the long, wide arc of green-tinted windows that wrapped the commons on the first floor and the library above. Eric continued on to the small junior lot about 100 yards to Dylan's right. Eric had the choice spot directly facing the student entrance where the bulk of the survivors would presumably flee. He could also cover the full southeast side of the building and interlock his fire with Dylan's to his left. Brooks Brown walked out for a cigarette and spotted Eric parking in the wrong lot. Brooks charged up to confront him about the test. By the time he got there, Eric had stepped out and was pulling out a big, hulking duffel bag. "What's the matter with you?" Brooks yelled. "We had a test in psych." Eric was calm but insistent. "It doesn't matter anymore," he said. "Brooks, I like you now. Get out of here. Go home." And that is the answer to number 11 on chapter 10. Brooks thought that was strange, but he shook his head and walked on away from the school. Eric's friend Nate Dykeman also caught sight of him arriving and also found the circumstances strange. Eric headed in with his duffel. By 11:12, they were scheduled to be back at their cars, arming up. A surveillance tape timestamped 11:14 indicates they had still not entered the Commons. They had less than 3 minutes. The timers are set for 11:17. There was only a modest chance that they could make it to safety in time. And they could hardly have hoped to be locked and loaded when the bombs blew. They could have reset the timers and sacrificed a few casualties. That would have required coordination, as they had parked across the lot from each other, and it would be risky to expose the bombs inside the cafeteria. They could have abandoned the plan, but the decoy bombs might already be exploding. Shortly after 11:14, they entered the Commons. They moved inconspicuously enough to go unnoticed. Not one of the 500 witnesses noticed them or their big, bulky bags. One of the bags we found inches from 2 tables strewn with food. They made it out and armed quickly. It was just like the drill, except this time each was alone, close enough for hand signals, too far to hear. They strapped on their arsenals, covered them with the dusters. Time was tight, and they broke with their drill, leaving the shotguns in the duffel bags. Each boy had a semi-automatic against his body, a shotgun in his bag, and a backpack full of pipe bombs and crickets. This is probably the moment they set the timers on their car bombs. It would just be a matter of seconds now. Hundreds of kids dead. As far as they knew, they had instigated mass murder already. The timers were winding down. Nothing to do but wait. Surveillance cameras should have caught the killers placing the bombs. They would have if either the bombers or the custodian had been on time. Every morning, the custodian followed the same routine. A few minutes before A-lunch, he pulled out the pre-lunch tape and set it aside for later viewing. He popped an old used tape into the machine, rewound it, and hit record. Rewinding took up to 5 minutes, meaning a brief pause in taping. Kids could leave all the garbage they wanted during that window, but hardly anyone was around to do so. The custodian was running late on Tuesday. He hit the stop button at 11:14 and no bombs were visible. Neither was Eric or Dylan. While waiting out the rewind, the custodian got a phone call. He talked and the tape sat a little longer. He got the new tape in and hit record at 11:22, leaving an 8-minute gap. The first frame shows the bombs visible and students near the window beginning to react. Something peculiar outside has caught their attention. Columbine ran on a bell schedule, and most of its inhabitants followed a strict routine. Several of them had broken it Tuesday morning. Patrick Ireland, the junior afraid to ask Laura to the prom, liked variety. Some days he spent A-lunch in the library, others in the cafeteria. He had stayed up late talking to Laura on the phone again and still had to finish his stats homework. So he headed to the library with 4 of his buddies as Eric and Dylan positioned the duffel bags. Patrick sat down at a table just above one of the bombs. Cassie Bernal, the evangelical junior who had transferred to Columbine to enlighten non-believers, pulled up a chair near the window. It was unusual to find her in the library at this hour. She was also behind on her homework, trying to complete an English assignment on Macbeth. But she was happy she had finished the presentation she would be making to her youth group that night. Mr. D was oddly absent from the cafeteria. His secretary had booked an interview, delaying his rounds. He sat in his office at the opposite end of the main corridor, waiting for a young teacher to arrive. Mr. D was about to offer him a permanent position. Deputy Neil Gardner, the community resource officer, worked for the sheriff's department, was assigned full-time to Columbine. He normally ate with the kids, and A-lunch was his optimal chance for bonding, a key element of his job. He wore the same security uniform with a bright yellow shirt every day, so he was easy to spot. Tuesday, Gardner took a break from his normal routine. He didn't care for the teriyaki on the menu, so he went for takeout from Subway with his campus boss, an unarmed civilian security guard. It was a beautiful day. Lots of kids were outside, so they decided to check out the smokers. They ate their sandwiches in Gardner's squad car in the faculty lot beside the smokers pit on the opposite side of the school. Robin Anderson sat in her car nearby. She had driven out of the senior lot just about the time Eric and Dylan were hauling the bombs in, but had missed them. She'd swung around the building to pick up 2 friends. She got antsy. Lunchtime was slipping away. 5 minutes passed, maybe 10. Finally, the girls appeared. Robin snarled at them, and they drove off. On the opposite end of the school, shots had already been fired. A freshman named Danny Rohrbough went to the Commons to meet up with two buddies. After a few minutes, they decided to head out for a smoke. If the bombs had worked, that choice might have saved them. He might have gotten out just in time. They headed out a side exit at the worst moment, directly alongside the senior parking lot. The bombers spent a minute or two by their cars. They knew the diversionary bomb should have already blown 3 miles to the south. In fact, it had fizzled. A surveyor working in the area had moved it, and the pipe bombs and one of the spray cans had detonated, producing a loud bang and grass fire. But the propane tanks, the main explosive force, lay undisturbed in the burning field. The decoy was Eric's only big bomb to ignite at all, but one of his dumber ideas. Officials learned of it just as the shooting started, 4 minutes before the first call from the school. The chief effect was to alert authorities that something was amiss in the area. Nothing of consequence was diverted. So there is number 12 about what happened to the decoy bomb. Eric and Dylan had to proceed on faith. As far as Eric and Dylan knew, cops were already speeding south. They would see the Commons disintegrate, though. Each car was positioned for a perfect view. The cafeteria would explode in front of them. They would watch their classmates be torn apart and incinerated, and their high school burning to the ground. Well, let me get the door. Some more air and light in here. Chapter 11, last chapter in this section, is called Female Down. At 11:18, the school stood intact. Some kids already made it through the lunch lines and were strolling outside, settling onto the lawn for a little picnic. No sign of disturbance. The timing devices were not precise. No digital readouts with seconds counting down in red numerals. They were old-fashioned clocks with a third little alarm hand positioned 2/5 of the way between the 3 and the 4. But they should have blown by now. Hundreds of targets streamed out the student entrance. They hopped into their cars and zipped away. Time for Plan B. There was no Plan B. Eric had staggering confidence in himself. He left no indication that he planned for contingencies. Dylan left no indication that he planned for much of anything. If they could just proceed to Act 2, mow the departers down in a crossfire and advance on the exits as scripted, they still could have topped McVeigh. But they didn't. The bomb failure appears to have rattled one of the boys. No one observed what happened next. Either boy might have panicked, but Eric was unflappable, the reverse of his partner. The physical evidence also points to Dylan. Eric apparently acted swiftly to retrieve his emotional young partner. We don't know whether they employed their hand signals or how they came together. We know that Eric was in the prime location yet abandoned it to come to Dylan's, and Eric moved quickly. Within 2 minutes, Eric had figured out that the bombs had failed, grabbed his packs, crossed the lot to Dylan's car, rushed with him to the building, and climbed the external stairs to the west exit. That's the first place they were observed at 11:19. Their new position set them on the highest point on campus, where they could survey both lots and all of the exits on that side of the building. But it took them away from their primary target, the student entrance, still disgorging students. They could no longer triangulate or advance aggressively without separating. At 11:19, they opened the duffel bags at the top of the stairs, pulled out the shotguns, and strapped them to their bodies. They locked and loaded the semi-automatics. One of them yelled, "Go, go!" Somebody, almost certainly Eric, opened fire. Eric wheeled around and shot at anyone that he could see. Dylan cheered him on. He rarely fired. They hit pedestrians among the trees, picnickers to the south, kids coming up the stairs to the east. They tossed pipe bombs down the stairs, into the grass, and onto the roof. And they shared a whole lot of hoots and howls and hearty laughs. What a freaking wild time. There's the answer to number 13 on chapter 11. Rachel Scott and her friend Richard Castaldo were the first down. They had been eating their lunch in the grass. Eric shot Richard in the arms and torso. He hit Rachel in the chest and head. Rachel died instantly. Richard played dead. Eric fell for it. Danny and his smoking buddies, Lance Kirkland and Sean Graves, were headed up the dirt path toward the stairs. They saw the gunmen firing, but assumed it was a paintball game or a senior prank. It looked like fun. So there is number 14 on chapter 11. They rushed straight toward the shooters to get closer to the action. Danny got out ahead, making it halfway up the stairs. Eric pivoted and fired his carbine rifle. A shot tore through Danny's left knee, in the front and out the back. He stumbled and began to fall. Eric fired again and again. As Danny collapsed, he took a second bullet to the chest and a third to the abdomen. The upper round went straight through him as well, causing severe trauma to his heart. It stopped pumping immediately. The third shot lacerated his liver and stomach, causing major organ damage and lodging inside. Lance tried to catch Danny, but realized he had been hit too, multiple times, in the chest, leg, knee, and foot. Danny's face hit the concrete sidewalk. Death was almost instantaneous. Lance went down on the grass. He blacked out and continued to breathe. Sean burst out laughing. He was sure it was paintball. They were part of the game now. Sean felt a shot zip by his neck. It left a cool breeze in its wake. He felt a couple of pricks, like an IV needle being pulled out. He did not realize he had been shot. He looked around. Both his friends were down. Pain signals reached Sean's brain. It felt like someone had kicked him in the back. He ran back for the door they had come out. He nearly made it, but the pain overcame him. His legs gave out, and he collapsed. He couldn't feel his legs anymore. He could not understand what had happened. He seemed to have been shot by a tranquilizer gun. Eric turned again and spotted 5 kids under a clump of pines in the grass. He fired and the kids took off running. One fell. He played dead too. Another took a hit but kept on running. The last 3 got away clean. The shooters kept moving. Lance regained consciousness. He felt someone hovering above him. He reached up toward the guy, tugged on his pant leg, and cried for help. "Sure, I'll help," the gunman said. The wait seemed like forever to Lance. He described the next event as a sonic blast that twisted his face apart. He watched chunks of it fly away. Breaths came rapidly. Air in, blood out. He faded out again. Dylan made his way down the hill toward Sean. Several people in the cafeteria saw him coming. Someone ran out, grabbed Sean, and started dragging him in. An adult stopped him. She said it was dangerous to move a seriously injured person. Sean ended up propped up in the entrance with a door pressed against him. Someone tried to step over him on the way out, planted a foot into Sean's back, and said, "Oh, sorry, dude." A janitor came by and reassured Sean. He held Sean's hand, said he would stay with him, but he had to help his kids escape first. He advised Sean to play dead. Sean did. Dylan fell for it again, or pretended to. He stepped right over Sean's crumpled body and walked inside. A stampede was underway in there. The lunch crowd had panicked. Most took cover under tables. Some ran for the stairs. Coach Sanders heard the commotion in the faculty lounge and ran toward the danger. "I don't think he even thought about it," his daughter Angela said later. "His instinct was to save his kids." Dave burst into the commons and tried to take charge. 2 custodians followed him to assist. Sanders directed students to get down. He rethought that pretty quickly and yelled, "Run!" Sanders looked around. There were exits in 3 directions, but most of them looked bad. There was one plausible option, across the commons and up the wide concrete stairway to the 2nd floor. No telling what was up there, but anything was better than this. Sanders led the way. He ran across the open room unprotected, waving his arms to get the kids' attention and yelling for them to follow. The tables offered little true protection, but they felt a lot safer. It was scary out in the open. The kids trusted Coach Sanders, though. A wave of students swelled behind Sanders. Most of the 488 people in the commons followed him toward the stairs. He bolted to the top and spun down to direct traffic. "To the left! To the left!" He sent them all down the corridor toward the east exit, away from the senior parking lot. "The whole time, he was just saving people," a student said. "He took me and just pushed me into a room." Some students stopped to warn others. Some just ran. Someone ran into the choir room and yelled, "There's a gun!" Half the kids took cover. The other half fled. A few doors down, in science room 3, students were immersed in a chemistry test. They heard something like rocks being thrown against the windows, but the teacher assumed it was a prank. "Stay seated and concentrate on your test," he said. Dave Sanders stayed behind until every kid had passed. The tail end of the mob was just pushing its way to the stairs as Dylan stepped inside the cafeteria. There were 24 steps. About 100 kids were caught on the staircase, racing for cover on the second floor. They were wedged between each other and the steel railings, nowhere to take cover. They were arrayed at different heights for easy access. Crouching was not an option. Anyone attempting to stop would get trampled. The cafeteria was roughly 100 feet wide. Dylan was in easy firing range. One or two pipe bombs or one burst from his Tech 9 would have halted the entire advance. Dylan took a few steps in, lifted his weapon up to firing position. This was the second time since setting the timer that Dylan separated from Eric. For the second time, Dylan appeared to lose his nerve. He swept his rifle in an arc across the room. He watched the students disappear up the stairs. He did not fire. He had only engaged his weapon a few times. Dylan looked around, then turned and stepped back over Sean in the doorway. The heavy door whacked Sean hard again in its grip. Dylan rejoined Eric at the top of the stairs. It's not clear why Dylan made his cafeteria excursion. Many have speculated that he came down to see what went wrong with the bombs, but he never even went near them. He made no attempt at detonation. It's more likely that Eric sent him in to check for opportunities and to rev up the body count. Dylan did nothing on his own, but Eric amused himself heartily at the top of the stairs, shooting, laughing, and hurling pipe bombs. He spotted a junior named Anne-Marie Hochhalter getting up from the curb to make a run for it. Eric hit her with a 9mm round. She kept running and hit her again. This time she went down. A friend picked her up, dragged her to the building, and got her out of Eric's sight. Then he let go of her and ran. He ducked behind a car in the senior lot, and a pipe bomb exploded where Anne-Marie had first collapsed. "This is awesome!" one of the killers yelled. By the time Dylan rejoined Eric, they had used up all the easy targets. Everybody caught outside had run like crazy or hidden. One last pack was still in the open. These students had fled across the senior lot, climbed over the chain link fence, and were racing across the soccer field near the base of Rebel Hill. Eric had a go at them. They were too far. Not out of range, just too hard to hit. Dylan fired at the distant targets too, bringing his total shot count up to 5. It was 11:23. The killers had enjoyed 4 heady minutes. So that last biz session was about number 15. It's kind of a big picture thing. How did Dylan's actions contrast with those of Eric? Deputy Gardner was the first officer alerted. The custodian radioed Gardner as soon as he started the new surveillance tape and caught sight of kids near the windows. The custodian sounded scared. The first 911 call came through to Jeffco at the same time. A girl was injured in the senior parking lot. "I think she's paralyzed," the caller said. The dispatch hit the police van at 11:23, just as Gardner drove around the building to the Commons, and Dylan rejoined Eric at the top of the stairs. "Female down," the dispatcher said. Gardner saw smoke rising and kids running. He heard gunshots and explosions and a flurry of dispatches on his radio. He couldn't quite tell where the commotion was coming from. 4 minutes into the mayhem, much of the student body was oblivious. Hundreds were running for their lives, but more sat quietly in class. Many heard the commotion. Few sensed any danger. Most found it annoying. The chaos and the solitude went on side by side, often only yards apart. As Dave Sanders ushered kids to the common staircase, part-time art teacher Patty Nielsen paced above him on hall monitor duty. Sanders herded the lunch crowd up the stairwell toward her, but then down a parallel hallway. Nearly 500 kids charged the length of the building. Nielsen never saw nor heard them. She heard the racket outside, though. Some kids ran up saying they heard gunfire. Nielsen was annoyed. It was a prank, obviously, or a video shoot. It had gone on for too long. She looked down the corridor toward the west exit. Through the large glass panes in the doors, she could see a boy with his back to her. He had a gun. He was firing it into the senior lot. She assumed it was a prop, a loud one, and totally inappropriate. Nielsen stormed down the hallway to tell him to knock it off. A junior named Brian tagged along to watch. They approached the exit just as the shooters ran out of targets. There are 2 sets of doors there, separated by an airlock. Nelson and Brian passed the first set and reached for the second handles. Eric spotted them. He turned, raised the rifle to his shoulder, aimed at Nielsen, and smiled. Then he fired. The glass shattered, but the bullet missed. Nielsen still thought it was a BB gun. Then she saw the size of the hole. "Dear God!" she screamed. "Dear God! Dear God!" She turned to run. He fired again. Another miss, but glass and metal shards and possibly a grazing bullet tore through the back of her shoulder. It burned. Brian had turned too. Nielsen heard him grunt, saw him lurch forward. His back arched, his arms flared, and he hit the floor hard. That looked bad, but he got right up onto his hands and knees to scurry back through the first doors. It was shrapnel, just like hers. She got down too, and they crawled the short distance back to the first doors. They got one partially open and squeezed through. Once they had that door behind them, they rose to their feet and ran. Nielsen was desperate for a phone. The library seemed like an obvious destination. It was just around the corner, spanning most of the south hallway behind a glass wall. Nielsen saw dozens of kids milling about inside, plainly visible to the shooters she pictured on her heels. She never looked back to see. Nielsen ran into the library to warn them. "There's a kid with a gun!" she yelled. There were no adults. That surprised Nielsen. Teacher Rich Long had rushed in moments before, yelled at everyone to get out, and then fled to warn others. Patty Nielsen had the opposite instinct. She ordered them down. Then Nielsen grabbed the phone behind the counter and punched in 911. She concentrated on details like the extra 9 for an outside line. Don't waste a second. Nielsen expected the shooter to arrive any moment now, but Eric was not following. He had been distracted. Deputy Gardner had pulled into the lot with lights flashing and siren blaring. Gardner had stepped out of his car, still confused about what he was walking into. Eric opened fire. He got off 10 rounds, all misses. Dylan did nothing. Gardner took cover behind his police car. Eric didn't even hit that. Then his rifle jammed. Eric fought to clear the chamber. Dylan fled into the school. Gardner saw his opening. He laid his pistol across the roof and squeezed off 4 shots. Eric spun around like he'd been hit. Neutralized, Gardner thought. What a relief. Seconds later, Eric was firing again. It was a short burst, then he retreated inside. It was 11:24. The outside ordeal lasted 5 minutes. Eric did most of the shooting. He fired his 9mm rifle 47 times in that period and did not use his shotgun. Dylan got just 3 shots off with the Tech 9 handgun and 2 with the shotgun. They headed down the hallway toward the library. Dave Sanders heard the shots when Eric fired on Patty Nielsen. Coach Sanders ran toward the gunfire. So there's number 16 on chapter 11. He passed the library entrance just moments after Nielsen ran in. He spotted the killers at the other end of the hallway. He wheeled around and ran for the corner. A boy peeked out of the choir room just in time to see him flee. Sanders wasn't just running for it. He was trying to clear students out of the line of fire. "Get down!" he yelled. And that concludes section of chapters 6 through 11. Thanks for watching. Keep calm and English on.